Today, our honored guest is Fran Drummond, who's going to tell us our stories. One of the most interesting, colorful characters of the Rocky Mountains. After a fascinating childhood in Japan and Korea and Mexico, she came to the Rockies in the early 50s, and for the last 60 years has been at the heart of Rocky Mountain life. For over 5 decades now, she has run Twin Falls Chalet, and many of you have been up there, I'm sure, and seen Fran at Twin Falls. So please join me in welcoming Fran to Everglades.
Thank you so much for being with us. Really, it's wonderful to see such a large crowd. We'll try and give you a little entertainment, we hope.
Can people hear Fran okay at the back? No.
Okay, I'm going to have to turn this up.
No, don't do that.
Oh.
It doesn't turn up.
Oh. All right,
It's recording.
I'll speak louder.
Speak louder. Yeah. So Fran, you go back to one of the most exotic places in the world, Korea.
Not even Korea, it's North Korea. What used to be Korea. And unless you're a Harlem Globetrotter, you don't want to be there.
Okay. Yeah. So just face out that way rather than towards me, and we'll project it out there.
All right.
Yeah. So you were born in North Korea.
Yes. And what is now North Korea.
Yeah.
In a place called Haejo that is now Pyongyang.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And your family has a long history in the Orient.
That's right. My great-great-grandfather went from Europe to Japan in the 1850s, and that was the opening of Japan for trade with the U.S. and through the Meiji period, the Emperor Meiji. He was selected. One grandfather was taking the mail boats from Holland to via the Java Straits to Japan. It was a 9-day trip. And other grandfathers, great-grandfathers, were commissioned by the Emperor Meiji to one as Marine captain of the Meiji Maru, which is now a historic site in the middle of Tokyo. That was the Meiji's own boat.
That was the Emperor's yacht.
The Emperor, no. It was a huge boat, it's not a yacht.
Okay.
Okay. And then, as time progressed, he was asked again and commissioned to build the first railway between Tokyo and Kobe and Osaka, for which he was given the Order of Japan.
Wow. So you have long roots back in the East.
That's
and
right.
your grandfather was the agent for Canadian Pacific steamships?
That's right. My grandfather was a partner of Fraser and Company. He was a Japan-China partner. And he worked between New York and Osaka and Kobe and Yokohama. And yes, we were as a family agents for CP steamships.
Yeah. Now your father, how did he end up in Korea?
Oh, well, he ended up in Victoria.
Okay, we'll go to Victoria. Okay, let's start in Victoria.
Yeah. He was 8 years old when he was sent from Japan to go to University School for Boys, which is now St. Michael's. And it was a military college. And he grew up in Victoria, and it was because my grandmother's youngest sister married Fred Pollard, and he had an aunt and uncle there, you see.
Okay.
And they were They lived right across the street from the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, which has our entire Japanese art collection. It's about 145 pieces that circumvent the globe out of the university, out of the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria.
Now, your dad was educated as an economist afterwards?
Yes, he when he got out of school, he was a young high school graduate. He wrote an entrance exam to McGill, and they wouldn't accept him because of his age. So he said phooey, and he went to the London School of Economics.
Right, and he became an economist, you told me?
A global economist, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And
much like our Stephen Harper.
Okay. Well, we won't go there. We don't want any fistfights in this room. So your father was an economist, educated at the London School of Economics, and how did he end up in Korea?
Well, he was given a ticket, first class, back from Switzerland and London, where he'd gone to school, and he traded it for a third class ticket and went right around the world. And when he ended up in New York, he opened the New York Times or maybe the Wall Street Journal, and here was a job in North Korea, in Korea, which was then Korea. And he applied for it and got it. And of course, the family were without this person that they thought they were educating to come into the firm. End of story. Yeah. Great adventurers.
Yeah, obviously, adventure is in your genes.
Yes.
And travel.
Yes.
Yeah. So your father was in Korea when you were born, and
he was there for 10 years, and I have 10 years of daily diaries with etchings and photography every day.
Wow. Where's that?
Yeah, it's. I'm currently going through all these papers. Yeah, that's there.
Okay. And what did he do in Korea?
We lived in a compound, and they set up the first plant for corn products refining company, Mazola oil, Cairo syrup. And there were 3 families. There was an American engineer, my dad, who was the accountant economist, and a Portuguese family that they were the office manager or whatever. And they lived together that way for 10 years in this compound.
Wow. And what did you do for amusement in Korea?
Well, I had a very sad start to life because I was a 10-month cesarean birth. And the doctor, a wonderful American missionary doctor, had 3,000 miles to go on horseback up into Manchuria, Mongolia, and back. She didn't get back. And so Mom had a cesarean section. Unfortunately, they sutured her with infected gut. And she was in hospital for over a year after my birth. So I was a carnation baby. And then as she came out of hospital, I had, of course, servants, and as she came out of hospital, I got diphtheria. So that was the added problem, and yeah, it wasn't a very healthy start.
No, difficult start.
Yeah.
And of course, you had tutors, and did you go to some sort of a school, or did you have tutors?
Well, I was only 5 when I went, but yes, I did have tutor. It was all home tutored. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you rode horses. You learned to ride horses there.
They tied me on horseback when I was 2 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
And my dad had 17 Mongolian ponies.
Wow.
And we had like a little, vegetable gardens and root cellars that I used to go up and down with the servants, and I used to. One thing I can always remember is going to market with the servants, and you see the Koreans used to, and I don't know if they still do, eat dog, and so we'd go to dog market and they'd go and pick the dog out that they were going to eat.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, quite an interesting situation. And of course, the kimchi would be put into the ground. It would be made and in these clay bowls with maybe a cork lid, and it would be dug into the ground. And frozen in the ground for 3 or 4 years, and then they'd take it out of the ground, and there was your kimchi, and the smell was incredible.
What is kimchi?
Kimchi is a pickle that you eat with your rice. Yeah.
It sounds pickled. Yeah.
So,
gee.
So my mother couldn't stand the smell of kimchi, and of course the women carried everything on their heads. They have a pad, and everything was carried. So their bodies were very straight, very upright and very straight. Because without that, they'd lose everything from their carrying it on their heads.
Yeah. So when and how did you leave Korea? You ended up.
Well, we were back and forth all the time between China, Japan, and Korea, and Kobe was home. That's where Vixen, the yacht, was, and it was a great yachting family that I come from. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was America Cup class, a great friend of J.P. Morgan's, and in fact bought his boat, which was called the Fiery, and then renamed the Vixen and refitted in Japan. But the boat was number 17 of the New York Yacht Club, so a very low number. Right. And that boat won every race. We used to call the boats around the floating pubs, but we raced. We had one drink a weekend, it was a gimlet after the race, and that was it. That was my grandfather. One drink, period. But we got to go out there and race, And I can remember being put to the tiller of the boat when I was young, and I was screaming and yelling because the wasps were running up. I had long pants on, and a wasp got up my leg, and they were biting me all the way up.
Yikes! Yikes!
No wonder I don't like sailing.
So you had, of course, you had relatives in Japan, so you were going back and forth from Korea to Japan all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then you said in about 1940 you moved to Japan. Things got bad in Korea?
Well, things were shutting down there, and of course things were looking bad in Japan at that stage of the game. One way you can tell that warfare is going to start is when the food supply starts crumbling. And when you can't buy good rice and you can't buy good tea, and you go to the store and it's black market, it's like, oh, it's shampoo this week. Everybody can buy shampoo, but you can't get fresh vegetables and this and that. Then you know something's wrong. The order of things are not working.
Right. Then you ended up in Japan, in 1940 and things started to fall
Well,
apart there.
in mid-1940, yes, we
Yeah.
were already in Japan, and I can remember I was 4.5, 5 years old, being pulled from my bed at probably 3 or 4 in the morning by the gendarmes who were going over the whole house looking for charts, looking for knitting, because they figured if you were knitting, you could have been weaving something into that pattern. So they took all the knitting, all the embroidery, all the charts out of the house, and they put us into jail for 90 hours. And after the 90 hours, the British consul came along and said, we can no longer protect you. You have to leave Japan. And at that point, a lot of the Britishers just fled, which we did. And we came out, we actually renamed the boat the Fiery. And because they knew the Vixen won everything, silver cups coming all the way through. So then we loaded the boat. We weren't able to bring money, we weren't able to sell properties, but we could bring possessions. And so we loaded the boat, and we waited till after New Year's, and they were still celebrating New Year's, and we fled. And it was they didn't realize, because of the name change of the boat, what was coming out of Japan. We came out on the last voyage of the Empress of Asia. She was torpedoed next time out. And we were 9 weeks across the Pacific being chased by submarines. So that, yeah, quite a way to come to.
What an adventurous start to your life. Yeah, it's a book already, and you're only about 5 years old. Yeah. So you came to boring old Victoria.
Yeah, but we weren't there long. We
No.
just dropped the grandparents and we fled to Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah, where I learned Frere Jacques, Frere Jacques. Yeah.
Okay. And now, why did you go to Montreal?
Because Corn Products had a job there for my dad, but then the outbreak of war put him into, he went down immediately on outbreak of the war and joined the RCAF. Now, he could not fly because he was colorblind, but he went in as a pilot officer and in intelligence. And he set up recruiting depots right across the country. Calgary was one of the places he was. And he also set up the delisting in Calgary at Lincoln Park.
And what is the delisting?
Well, that's when you're leaving leaving the forces.
Oh, at the end of your service.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So your father was in the RCF during the war, and
Yes, and he was in Torquay, England, with the RAF and RCAF, teaching Japanese to those who were going to Pacific Theater. And so if they were if they happened to be put down in Burma, they could suffice by knowing at least a few words of Japanese to, in case they became prisoners of war, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay. And then after the war, you started a whole new adventure in another country.
That's right. Now you mentioned when we were chatting, Chic, about coming to Canada and we weren't Canadian. Well, I want to let you know that until 1947, there wasn't a Canadian. You were all British. It was only in 1947 that the Canadian Citizenship Act was enacted.
Okay, I didn't.
Yeah. So, it was 1946, and I was on a DC-3 that went from Vancouver to New York, to learn Spanish, New York down to LA and Mexico City. And that's a long way on a DC-3, let me tell you.
I bet it is. Yeah. So now you spent the next almost 10 years in Mexico.
Yes, back and forth again from Canada to Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to Latin America too. You know, we were down in Cali and Bogota and Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo. And I can remember we were in Mexico City and that's where my dad was supposed to be as chief financial officer for corn products, but he kept passing out 7,500 feet. The altitude got to him, and he said, well, I don't mind passing out, but it's when my wallet disappears. we better move. So we moved to Guadalajara because it's 6,000 feet, and then he'd commute back and forth to Mexico City. But we had our plant in San Luis Potosí, which was near San Juan de los Lagos, where Nestle had their plant, and the people in the food business were all friends, and so we'd make this wonderful trip from Guadalajara over to San Juan de los Lagos, visit with the Nestle people, then on to San Luis Potosí, where they had a little casita, a small house for us to stay in while Dad worked doing overviewing the audit or whatever of the plant, and I just had a marvelous time in those places.
I'll bet you did.
Yeah.
And you rode horses too.
Oh yes. Well,
horses were a big part.
I was put on a horse in Mexico City to keep me quiet, and of course sent to private school, and that's why I love uniforms. I mean, you just have to get a clean blouse. It's the same blouse, but you don't have to worry about changing colors or anything. It's just right there, you know. But horses came into being. I rode with the great Humberto Mariles, who won the Olympics 3 times, with Urisa and Dacourt. They were the jumping specialists. They rode as the Mexican Army team. They rode in Madison Square Gardens and the Toronto Royal Winter Fair. And they often brought down new Canadian horses back to Mexico to train. Humberto Mariles had a very fiery temper. His horse Arete was wonderful, and occasionally we would be able to ride Arete. This horse Arete, which means earring, is now a huge sculpture in the middle of the Paseo de la Reforma in Mexico City. And anybody going there can give the bum a pat.
Okay.
But the thing, Humberto had a very sad life because he had a new Cadillac that he was driving on the Paseo de la Reforma, and somebody had an accident, and his fender was crumpled. And so he got out, and they had a ferocious argument, and he took out his gun and shot the guy, dead. So that put us, because as an international figure, that put him into jail. And there the heroin addicts got to him, and he died of a heroin overdose in jail. Such a sad ending to an illustrious career.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, he was a wonderful instructor, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, what an opportunity to learn to ride from a guy like that.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we were able to ride in Latin America, Cuba. We were given the keys to Cuba. This is before pre-Castro, and we rode in Argentina. But we always rode with the team, not on the team, you see, with the team. And we were youngsters going along with them. Mm-hmm.
Wow, good for you. So how did you come to the Rocky Mountains?
Well, I came up to visit my grandparents, and I have never enjoyed Vancouver Island. It is not my place to be. And so I had a couple of weeks with my grandparents, and then I said, "Dear Grandpa, would you give me the money to get on a CPR train so I can go see some horses?" And so he did. And I got off at Lake Louise, and I walked into Deer Lodge, and I wasn't even work age, and they hired me.
Wow.
And they gave me scrubbing tools, and a huge red brick and some nice flannelette to put around it. They said, you scrub and wax those floors. Those wood floors were huge at Deer Lodge. And that's what I did the first few weeks. Until I got
wow.
What year was that?
1952.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who hired you?
I can't remember.
No,
but there was, we were just deathly scared of Gertrude and Miss Seaton. And Bob would come down from Edmonton every so often, but Freddie was there, but we were just, and Mrs. Hatt was the head housekeeper, and yeah, we had a marvelous time. Oh yes, and we'd go out, we'd do our hiking, you see, early in the morning, and we'd go past the bakery, and Bruno would be there, because he'd be smelling all the baking. And so we'd go, we weren't scared of the bears, we'd say, "Bruno, get the hell out of here."
Oh, that's Bruno the bear, not Bruno the Swiss guide.
No, this is Bruno. This is Bruno the bear. And Bruno the bear would just look at us and go the other way.
Yeah. Just got to be direct with them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just like a horse, you tell it what to do, it'll go.
Oh, good. And you met, did you ride some horses? Did you ride with Ray and Alpha?
No, I rode with Bud.
With Bud Brewster?
Yeah, with Brett Mitchell and Ralph. Ralph was the guy that was there looking after Bud's horses, yeah.
Okay.
And they'd always take me here and there.
Okay.
I did know the Legaces, though, yeah.
Yeah. And you told me about another guy, somebody called Tumbleweed.
Yes, Tumbleweed. He was with Ray Legace. And he was from Maple Creek, Saskatchewan. And he had a grizzly beard. And he'd always come over and try and give you a whisker rub. And you just turned and ran like anything in the other direction.
Oh.
But we always did. I can remember falling over a porcupine at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get a hike in. I had quills all the way up and down my leg. They had to take them out.
We had a lot up there.
Yes, exactly.
And then you went down to Calgary, to the Stampede.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, back at Lake Louise, we had Rocky Mountain Tours with Pop Waterhouse. Remember that? Right across from, and then we had Brewster's down the way. So you always got over to the Rocky Mountain Tours or Brewster's on your day off to get a ride up to the ice fields or over to Yoho or Moraine Lake or wherever, or Banff, to come into Banff and go to the dances. That was a big thing, and you came in with to hear Bruce Bristow or Trono and just have a few hours of relaxation, climb on a bus, and go back to Lake Louise. Yeah.
Right.
Wonderful wiener roast. Always good wiener roast. Yeah. Great way to have fun and enjoy, and lots of singing. Yeah.
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 Good. And you also fell in love with Calgary, with the Stampede about that time.
Oh, well, my cousin was down in Calgary. He was a McGill graduate my cousin's husband was a McGill graduate in commerce, and he was working for Duke Drilling. And their neighbor was the general manager of CKXL. And when I arrived, I said, I'm going to the Stampede. They said, oh, it's hard to get tickets, but Ed will take you to the Stampede. And to the Stampede, he did take me, because I was above the chutes, and he was announcing, and I was feeling the vibration of then the greatest rodeo rider ever, Casey Tibbs. He was riding right beneath me. Well, you know, I fell in love with the Stampede.
And you've been a Calgarian ever since.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So when did you actually move to Calgary and set up housekeeping and, you know, actually settle in Calgary?
My resume told you that.
Well, I can tell you right now.
My CV.
You started work at the Calgary Public Library in 1953.
Yeah.
So just the next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was William Castell that took me under his arm, and he used to invite me out to Sylvan Lake to his cottage there, and it was not long after I was out doing summer work at the regional libraries, and I ended up at what is now the South Calgary Library, where Frances Colson was head librarian, and her husband was Bud Colson, who was working for the Alberta Research Council as an engineer, inventing the way to separate the oil from through a hot water process for the oil sands. Yeah, and she used to come in and complain religiously because he had gone through 15 Maytags in under a year.
Yeah. So you settled in Calgary. You became a librarian, and you also worked at the university. Well, in those days it was called
the University of Alberta Calgary branch.
Calgary branch.
And that is where I really came into my own, because Belle Grant was the chief librarian. She'd been there since 1930 something, and she suddenly got an imbalance of the middle ear. And there was a secretary, and there was myself. And I took over and looked after her domain for the next year and a half. And at that point, things opened up for me. Yeah. It's all called luck, you know.
It's all called luck.
Yeah.
And it's serendipity, meeting the right people at the right time.
That's right.
And you met some interesting people.
Oh, and I
through
have to backtrack a bit.
Yeah.
When I was with the Calgary Public Library, I worked the bookmobile service, and that kept me busy. And the head of that division was Sheila Douglas, a Banff girl. Yes, you remember the Douglas family? They lived up on Otter Street. Yeah, and Sheila would bring me up to Banff, and she'd tell me about climbing from Banff with her skis right up to the top of Norquay to get a ski run down.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that something? Yeah.
Just like Rob.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Rob told me about that once.
Yeah. Well, you were the same era. You would have worked together.
Yeah, she was. She lived up on Otter Street.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And my sister, not my eldest sister, but my second one that's just older than I am, was a very good friend of Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
They went to school. They were in the same grade in school.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, that's something.
Yeah.
Small world.
Small world.
So
Exactly.
you became very active. You became a keen skier then in Calgary. Joined the Calgary Ski Club?
Well, check. This is where I first met you, because I wanted to ski, and nobody else. My roommates. I had this. I was a bit adventurous there. I rented this house, and I had 3 roommates to share this place, but they all liked bongo drums or fast racing cars. They were NASCAR drivers, you know, everything but. And I said, I want to ski. So I used to end up down at Ethan and Bruce Compton's place, Premier Cycle and Sport, right where TD Square is right now, and where the Black Knight Room, the Wales Hotel used to be, and Chic used to be in there selling pitons and climbing rope, and we'd put our name up on the board to hitch a ride up to either Norquay Louise or Beau Summit, and we'd pay our $2 or $3 for gas, and off we'd meet in a certain place, and off we'd go, and it was the way all people in the Calgary Ski Club congregated.
Right,
yeah.
right. You were on the executive of the ski club.
Yes, I
for a
was.
while. Yeah.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Did you turn out the newsletter too?
I turned out the annual and the newsletters. Yeah.
Yeah. And you met a bunch of the stars of that era, McConkey and
Well,
Moser and
that
those
was
guys?
later. That was
that
a little
bit later.
Yeah.
Was it? Was it? Yeah. And now we come to Twin Falls. We're getting close to Twin Falls.
Yeah. Well, no, there's a little bit in between there that
okay.
When I was up, you see, the oil industry has always maintained my interest. Okay, the rest has been charity. I mean, you don't run a business in the mountains for 6 weeks a year and expect to make money. You just hope you break even, and often you don't. So you have to have that backup of a good job, and people who care for you. Well, Amoco did, and before that, Gulf Oil did, and the president of Gulf, his name was Ed Gallagher, called me up and said, "We'd like you to move from the university to start our library in Calgary and then in Toronto. And you don't have to work weekends." Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Well, so they lured me, and I went, and I did set up the libraries for Gulf in Calgary and Toronto.
And that led to a long career with them.
Well, no, a short career with Gulf.
With Gulf.
Yeah, short career with Gulf. They were run out of Pittsburgh, and the architects came in, and they were building a new building, now called, it's still there, Eldon House, but they didn't think about employees. They thought about cost of keeping employees, and so they had an open office concept, and when you have 100 geologists in an open office concept, and then 75 or 80 engineers in an open office concept, it doesn't work. The geologists were out in the elevator lobby on their hands and knees with their maps to try and figure out what was going on. And I stood about 15 weeks of this, and I said, this is the end of the road. You know, this is not going to be. So I left them, and that's when Twin Falls actually started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And Twin Falls was what year? The first time to Twin Falls?
1962.
62. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who was running it at that time when you first went up there? Do you remember?
It was closed up.
Oh.
Bridget had been there before. Bridget's here, and she was there before. And Renata was there, and Bridget had met her husband there at Twin Falls. Ken had come up and swept her off her feet. And no, it had been closed up. There had been, the Varsity Outdoor Club had been there. I believe it was that winter before. And they had that terrible accident with Gene Sharp. The monument is up at the top of the whaleback. And there were 7 kids, young people buried, but Gene was face down right into Twin Falls Creek. They were staying at Twin Falls and had climbed up, and the whole shale slope slid. And so my first summer there, I was digging out all their packs and skis and seeing that they got down to the railway station to ship home. Yeah, sad, very sad, very sad, yeah. That brought Norman Mackenzie, who was president of UBC, as my guest for some years, because he was a friend of the Sharp family. Gene Sharp's father was superintendent of schools for Vancouver. Sad year, sad times, yeah. So that was my beginning at Twin Falls. Now, am I boring you? No. Okay. Now, we started off, I wrote this letter, to whom it may concern. I would like to lease with option to buy Twin Falls Chalet, or Twin Falls Lodge, as it was then called. And I had a letter 10 days later back from Bud Brewster. And he said, it's yours. So that's where it all started. And I loaded up the groceries in Banff. Bert Davies filled up his truck. Now, he had been warden at Saskatchewan River Crossing, and the father of Jim Davies, and he said, okay, girl, I'm going to take you over with all these things. And we put everything down at the Yoho Valley Lodge with Johnny Boychuk, one of the old packers of the area. And Johnny packed and packed and packed for me. And 12 pack horse loads later, and at 1:30 in the morning, we were through. But I had 22 pack rats inside and a wolverine outside, and here I was. So it took, I put all the meat into the new garbage cans and put it into the creek with rocks on top. All the meat was gone in the morning. Yeah. So that was the start to Twin Falls. And the wolverine was between me and the outhouse, and I couldn't get to the outhouse. Yeah, it dominated the place. And then I cleaned and cleaned and cleaned, knowing I would like to get open. This was about June the 25th or 26th, and I was hoping for the 1st of July opening. And one evening, late evening, 9:30, 10 at night, this grisly fellow arrived. And his name was Paul. And he carried a Trapper Nelson pack filled with rock, absolutely brimming with rock. And he said, oh, I always stay here. And I thought, oh my God, I've inherited this guy, you see. And well, my feet are sore. Where's the pan of hot water that I can put my feet in? All right, here's your pan of hot water. Now, why are you here? Well, I have a Canada Council grant for $5,000 in rock sculpture, and I do my carving here. I said, oh. Well, he went out to get some wood several days later with my chainsaw, my new chainsaw, and he was working on the ground. He wasn't chopping down trees, but working on the ground. And somehow the chainsaw got caught into his leg, and I heard a howl, and the next thing I knew, my first aid was limited. And so I was putting reading the first aid book. What do you do now? Well, you put a tourniquet on. All right. And you better give him a little bit of brandy. So, okay, here's a spot of brandy. Now, so I had him on my shoulder some hours later, and I helped him out of the Yoho. And we got a ride down to Golden, where I dropped him off at the hospital, and 110 stitches later, he survived, but and so I quickly carried all his rock out of the Yoho, and all his pack too, and left it with the wardens down below and said, "That's it, baby."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So he didn't come back.
He didn't come back.
No. Now, you did a major restoration, your first restoration.
Yes.
You fixed it all up.
The first restoration. No, it was the saving Twin Falls from demolition, and that happened in 1969, and. That's when I bought the rights to Twin Falls, and it was quite a venture, because in Ottawa, you have to be very political to work in the parks. You realize you have to be very political. In Ottawa, they had been stargazing, and they had a meeting, and pulled out the wrong file. And so they were viewing lodges and wardens' cabins to be demolished. And they were showing Revelstoke, calling it Twin Falls. And so we got caught in this mess, and Twin Falls was going to be demolished. So 300,000 signatures later. And I must say, Amoco was very good. Pan American Petroleum Corporation at the time was very good, but they wondered why I was Xeroxing so much. and I was sending these all these signatures to Chrétien. And I dealt with Chrétien before. I'll backtrack on this because when I came in to open Twin Falls the first year, there was no bridge over the top of the falls, and it wasn't there, and people were complaining. They'd get up to the top of the falls, they couldn't get over, the trail was visible. I thought, oh, we're going to have an accident. And so I put a note on the door saying, please send the government money. It hasn't got enough money to put in a bridge. And so I collected a number of dollars, all made out to, I believe it was Jean Chrétien. And you see, they couldn't accept money, and so they had to return all this. So they had a full staff working to send letters back to the people that were sending $1 in for me. And anyway, I got my bridge very quickly.
Good.
Very, very quickly. So that started the political ventures. And then with the 300,000 signatures, going back to the restoration, that eventually the demolition was rescinded, and I went ahead and we were able to finance the changeover of the building, and then looking for the right man. Well, there was none other than the great Dave Leslie, who had built 47 log structures in the national parks, including Temple, including the Post Hotel, and many of the CPR buildings. And so he came in with his dog, Happy, and for 2 years he worked with me. And we would start, well, we put on a new roof and the beautiful new skylights which let the light in so you could see what you were doing. And then we redid all the interiors. He put in a sink for me, he put in counters for me. Before I was leaning over little tables like this doing dishes and you know, so forth. And he and his dog, Happy, and then he said, we're going to re-chink. Do you know how to re-chink a building? No, I don't know how to re-chink a building. Well, you will by the time I'm finished with you. So I was chinking the building, and then he said, do you know how to peel the bark off the logs in the kitchen? No. Well, you're going to learn. So it was the second year, and it was Thanksgiving. And he said, he looked at me, he said, girl, it's snowing and we got to get out of here. This is it. This is all we can do. And it had snowed probably 10 feet before we got the shutters on. And we got out at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was carrying easily 100 pounds of his tools, and he was carrying another 80. And we said goodbye in the parking lot at Takaka Falls. I was headed to Calgary, and he was headed to Wassa Lake. Yeah.
And that saved Twin Falls.
That saved Twin Falls, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you met Ed Voigt. He used to come up in those days too.
Oh yes, he was one. He was one of my first patrons, clients. Yes, and he'd bring his people up. Yeah, and he was already 82, 83 when he was still bringing people into Twin Falls. Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been fun. Did you sit around the...
But you see, we knew each other from Lake Louise, because anytime we went climbing at Lake Louise, I've climbed everything in the Louise area, but we'd always go to the Swiss guide's hut. You know, and we'd find out, well, what do we do? How do, you know, what knots do we tie? We'd have a cup of tea and talk about what we were doing. I was there, you see, at Lake Louise when the Mexicans fell off the face of Victoria. And they were told not to be there.
Yeah, 1954.
52, I believe.
I'll bite my tongue.
All right. Yeah, Howard Shrigley was the RCMP in command.
Was he?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you worked with a lot of wardens those years too. You had some real favorite wardens.
Oh well, the warden service in those days was a true warden service because they weren't unionized. You live a lifestyle in the mountains. You don't unionize and say, I start at 7 o'clock, I'm out at 2:30. That's not a lifestyle. You live with the flow. And now we're getting into really creepy situations of texting each other. Oh my God, oh goodness, I've got to get back to that person. And you know, it's not going to matter when the satellites come down and there's going to be nothing left. Anyway.
So who were your favorite wardens?
Wonderful people. Wonderful people. Well, Andy Anderson, who was later a park superintendent, Ian Syme, who was both warden and park superintendent, Bill Hollingsworth, who has come up to see me, and that Hollingsworth Hill is named after him, going up our way, up the valley, and he built that for Moser, for the people skiing down, and Jerry Israelson, great guy, Dale Lowen. Donnie Mickle I knew before he was a warden, because he used to pack for his dad, and he'd pack his horses, because he didn't have a truck. He'd pack the horses at Lake Louise and trail them all the way over and up the valley. See, transportation has been the major factor. It's been the most onerous thing to get your supplies in the backcountry. Yeah.
And the packers were hugely important.
Oh, absolutely.
In the early years.
Absolutely,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I mean, it was Johnny Boychuk, it was Brett Mitzel and his family, and Leo and Clay and Aaron, and then there was Dale Lowen and Kevin Stanton.
Yeah, all these people.
And the thing is with packing horses, you can pack horses in the pouring rain and that horse will go. You try and pack a helicopter and it's grounded. It's grounded.
Yeah. And you were saying the helicopters were a lot more expensive too.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's. But they told you couldn't use pack horses.
Well, there was one regional superintendent that decided that he liked dogs, and the pack horses disturbed the dogs. So, yeah, we lost.
Oh,
we're fighting now to get pack horses back.
Are you?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So you've.
But the regional directors that were terrific. Steve Kuhn is one of the top people, and I can tell a lovely story about Steve, and I will. That Steve was up in the Little Yoho when the Little Yoho cabin was quite new for the warden cabin, and the wardens were fretting about taking Steve in. Oh, the regional director. I said, don't worry, he's the nicest man in the world. Well, anyway, I guess they had a steak and a couple of glasses of wine, but the warden in the top bunk fell on top of Steve in the middle of the it's like us falling on top of Don Stacy, you understand? Yeah. Stands there, so he'll know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was something to blush about, yeah. But they made it through.
Yeah, good. And
Yeah.
you've had some hassles with the parks as well as working with these great wardens. You were telling me about Virginia, the architect, the light expert.
Oh yes. I was saved from having electricity at Twin Falls. Virginia was the park architect, and this would be back in the early 80s, I think. And she brought in a fellow who was teaching electricals at SAIT. And they wandered through the door at supper time, and they said, we'd like to stay for 2 or 3 nights, gratis, of course, while we find out whether you can have electricity. And so they had their water wheels, and they had all this contraption, all this stuff on their back, and of course they stayed. Well, they decided, oh yes, there's enough velocity in those falls that you can light up the Yoho Valley. I said, I don't want to light up the Yoho Valley. And off they went. But I was saved, unfortunately. This is a sad story, because the electrical expert was 2 or 3 weeks later, in the Kananaskis, and he was hit by lightning and died. so you know, that was the end of our electrical story.
That was the end of lighting up the Yoho Valley. Yeah. Oh, gee. Wow. Wow. And you've had some hard knocks over the years. You were telling me about breaking your leg in 1987, I think. Was that
Yeah.
one?
Well, that was 1988, because I was in Nepal in '87, and then came out, and it was in the middle of the Dome-Amoco merger, and the Dome-Amoco merger was a $5 billion merger, the biggest oil industry merger to that period. And it was excruciating, to say the least. And so much so that I kept a bed for the president of Amoco at Twin Falls every weekend so that he could get away from a telephone, just so he could think straight and keep going. And anyway, he had told me before I went up in the mountains, he said, "You are going to be fighting for your job Monday morning." Oh, thank you. I think I better go to the mountains. So I went to the mountains, and unfortunately or unfortunately, some people there decided to party till 3:30 in the morning. And I couldn't get them to bed, so I just stayed up and finally got up. The lights out, was up 2 hours later cooking, and left that evening to go back to Calgary. This is Sunday evening for the Monday morning hassle. Well, it was about 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night, when I was on Hollingsworth Hill, at the top of the hill, and I was just running along, and the pouring rain, and I slipped, and it was like a baseball skid, and then I heard crack, turn, but I still didn't know. I had a helicopter net in my pack, 50 pounds in my pack that I was bringing out to, and I still didn't know what was wrong, and so I got up and inched my way down. It took me the next 4 hours in the pouring rain to get to the car. I knew I was hyperthermic, and I had a sleeping bag in the car, so I wrapped a Safeway bag around my boot, didn't take it off, took the other boot off, took the good boot off, and climbed into the sleeping bag to get warm. About 2 or 3 hours later, I thought, I've got to get to Calgary. I've got this meeting, and so with a Volvo manual transmission, I headed off to Calgary. The only thing that is remembered is that I dearly wanted a cup of coffee, and there was no way I could stop to get a cup of coffee. I ended up driving into the Holy Cross Hospital, saying to the commissionaire, "I'm dirty, I've had a fall, I don't know what's wrong with my leg, but I have to be at a Dome-Amoco meeting at 8 o'clock." And he said, "You park the car there," and he had a wheelchair for me and took me in. And that was the end of the story, because I had a break that started at the ankle but had spiraled to the knee. And so I had a 8-inch plate put in with all the screws and everything. And of course, nobody would feed me. You see, they were waiting to operate. They were waiting for the swelling to go down, but I haven't eaten since breakfast yesterday morning. Anyway, the long story. Yeah, we survived that one.
Yeah, you did. Well, that just shows your toughness. Yeah, and then. Of course, there was the unfortunate story of Kathy Newsfield. Do you want to talk about Kathy? Or?
Yeah, that is one of the most there's the other story too that will follow after that. But this happened in 1984.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was a Saturday, and I arrived at Twin Falls with Randall Robertson, just following me up the trail, but he wasn't quite there yet. And then suddenly somebody shot through the door and said, "There's a girl over the falls!" And Randall came in at this time, and luckily he had communication, and so that started a 7-year war, because you're not declared dead for 7 years when you don't find a body. But that summer was the most horrific summer I've ever spent. And I think what happened is she was a Queen's graduate. She was a gold medalist, I think. And she was going to Australia to take veterinary science, I believe. She had found a schoolmate in Calgary who was an engineer with Motorola. And they stopped for tea at the chalet, wandered up, and he said, "Well, I'll take out lunch," and she said, "I'll go for water," and she never reappeared. Just vanished, totally. And we feel she either leaned over and was drawn by the water, or she became, she was maybe a little too warm from hiking up, and perhaps just got dizzy and fell in, or she slipped like this. Could be, the feet went right out from under her. Anyway, there was never a sign, never any sign of her body or any part of her thereafter.
Wow.
Much like the Malaysian Airlines.
I was just thinking the same thing. It'll make a great story for the next 100 years. Yeah. Okay. So now Twin Falls is in pretty good shape. Again, there's been a...
Oh, and I want to tell you about the next person. The next
right,
person. Yeah.
Right. Okay,
the next person that fell into the falls, his name was Helmut, and he was a Volkswagen designer in Kassel, Germany, and that's where my grandfather was from. And so he came into the kitchen and said, "I'm from Kassel, Germany. I am doing a 9-week trip of Canada. I'm up in the Nahanni. I'm here. I'm in Point Pelee. His itinerary was whatever, and he was very nice, because very personable, because he wasn't offhand. He just was a good communicator, and so off he went up to the top of the falls, and the next thing, I had the Edmonton Roadrunners on the trail. A roadrunner ran through the back door and said, "There's a man in the whirlpool." And I said, "Oh my God." So, here's a sleeping bag, here's rope, here are blankets. Roadrunners, you keep going. And there was a doctor coming in to stay with me, and she arrived. This is the last thing she wanted. But she just dropped her pack and up she went. She was from Calgary. And there was a dentist on the trail and another doctor on the trail. And somehow between their day packs, the rope, lighting a fire, and my sleeping bag that was burnt beyond reason, we got him out of the whirlpool and brought him down. And all I can remember, the dear doctor saying as she hit the door, the one that was staying with us, she said, "Fran, do you have a bottle of scotch?" And I said, "Yes, I always keep a bottle of scotch." "Oh, thank you." So anyway, he stayed at Twin Falls gratis for 3 days, and the doctor stayed in with him and saw him out. but we never heard from him again. I guess it was so troublesome he didn't want to ever relive that.
So did he go over the falls?
No, he was in the whirlpool going round, 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 round for 45 minutes before we got him out.
At the top of the
At
falls?
the top of the falls.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
can
he's
you
one
imagine?
lucky-
He's one lucky,
lucky guy.
yeah, one lucky guy.
Yeah, that's a long ways down. How high are the falls?
About 600, 700 feet.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a long ways down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't
Yeah.
want to be caught in that one.
No. Okay. Well, moving on to Twin Falls today is in pretty good shape. You did another major renovation recently.
Well, it's Heritage Canada and I started it. It was supposed to be $100,000, so I started the project, and by the time we got through all the politicking, I brought out Alan Mackey, who was living in Toronto. I wanted him to do the job, and then we brought down his top logman from the Chilcotin, and we all convened at Twin Falls, and I helicoptered them in, and then he said, well, you have to prepare the logs, and so, yes, all right, we'll prepare the logs. So we could cut the logs on site, but we had to actually bring it together with Parks Canada and hire a logger that would be amenable to both ourselves and the parks, and a lot of politicking going on, and so and then taking a major helicopter, a huge helicopter, and taking those logs one by one after peeling. That's another thing we had to do: peel every log, and huge logs, you see, bring them down and stack them in a location right by the lodge. That eats up money very quickly. Yeah, so that's the part I did, and then we were running out of funds, and so I threw up my hands. I said, I can't do anymore. And Parks came in, Heritage came in at that point and said, well, we will complete it. So they did.
So, and that was replacing the lower logs.
Yes, but you see, Alan Mackey, had he done it, said, I will take 3 years to do it. 3 falls. We will close the lodge about the 15th of August, and I will work through Thanksgiving. And in that time, we can get so much done. And Parks decided to do it over a winter. Well, to have cement dry, it has to be 85 degrees in 35 below zero weather. That takes a lot of propane. Yeah. And so it was far more costly. Alan Mackey was looking at it at a very economical, from a very economical standpoint, and saying, hey, if we do it this way, it'll be done well and the cost will be low. But Parks Canada had a deadline, and so we went the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where our taxpayers' money went, to propane, to heat the cement. Yeah. Wow. But it's in pretty good shape now, and it's a National Historic Site?
Yes, it's a National Historic Site. We hope that that'll save it from the next demolition, and just hope we can keep it going. Yeah. I'm planning to phase out, and looking for a partnership. Anybody to be a partner? Yeah. And it has to be found fairly quickly because the renewals are coming up, and we want to. I'd like to phase out, say, over 3 years, but be teaching the ways of the mountains and how the thing should be flowing. Twin Falls will never be a money maker, so it's a tax write-off situation, if you will, because you're at best breaking even in a 6-week to 8-week period. The costs are too high. If you had it going 8 months of the year, yes, you might be able to do something. But you know, the place has had wonderful guests. Lauren Harris, I have his name way back in the 30s as a frequent visitor. He's in the registry. The King of Siam, the president of Harvard University, and those are in the old days before my time. And in my time, many, many wonderful people who have passed by and keep coming, like Jill and Denny Burns.
Wow. So it's been a labor of love all these years.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. It's been a passion.
Yeah.
And you know, if everybody worked with a passion, wouldn't it be a wonderful world?
Yeah, it would be. It would be. Well, that's a fabulous story, and I'm sure there's a few people with a few questions for, or unless you have anything more you want to add?
Did you know Lizzie Rummel?
I worked at Assiniboine. I volunteered at Assiniboine, and this was pre-Twin Falls. When I signed the papers for Twin Falls to lease Twin Falls, I was up on Mount Norquay, and I was approached by somebody who really loves Assiniboine like no other, and that's Jim Davies. And he was looking for help for Lizzie. And he said, well, you'll get a flight in my Cessna. All right, Jim. So anyway, I went in, I believe it was about the 10th of February, and I came out May 24th, having volunteered every day for like 12 to 15-hour days. Yes, I worked with Lizzie.
It was a labor of love.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have one. So when you broke your leg, you were going in to go to this meeting, and did you keep your job?
Yes. Yes. Yes, I did. But you know, that job then entailed bringing down something like 7 or 8 libraries of the Dome people, because they had, what had happened in the situation, Dome had merged with other companies, Ashland, Siebens Oil and Gas, you know, you name it, and Hudson Bay Oil and Gas. And we were in bed with Hudson Bay Oil and Gas, 50-50 on our properties. And if we hadn't taken over our Dome, we would have lost these properties because they were falling off the cliff. So we were in this very vulnerable situation, and the cleanup was horrific. I walked in, I had several fine employees with me that had been with me for years and highly trained and knew what they were doing. They were just sent off in directions. Yeah, you do that, you do that. Okay, see ya. But I walked in, and I think I had 95 or 100 employees that I didn't even know that were trying to stick a knife in my back for the next couple of years. Oh, it was horrific. It was horrific, yeah, till we got that thing under control. We lost a lot by having to save ourselves, yeah. But that's what it is. Yeah. And I have one other thing. In 2005, I was presented by the provost of the University of Alberta, provost of the University of Calgary, and the Alberta Library Association. I was named Centennial Librarian in the field of special libraries.
Wow.
and I feel that you know, that's quite a good balance. Yeah, yeah.
And just to give a little bit more expansion on the joys of working with Ottawa, the Twin Falls is surrounded by a lot of deadfall and that. Could you tell the story about how you got your firewood?
How I got my fire? No. For years we had to helicopter in all the firewood. Yeah. It would be cut in Canmore or Golden and trucked in, and then flown in. And you know, luckily, it was a costly venture. It was a very costly venture. Right now, they logged around Twin Falls. When we did the last restoration, and they said use the wood. I said, oh, thank God. Yeah. So and back there, that wonderful fellow with the beard at the back, he came down from Rocky Mountain House. Here's my wood chopper, and he can fill this room with wood. He's marvelous.
Matter of fact, a few years ago, Fran had sent me up the trail to recover the rest of these logs that she purchased from Parks Canada to do the restoration. Seeing she paid for these logs, we had to go up and retrieve these for firewood. Like Fran says, these logs are this big around, and they're probably 200 to 300 meters up the whaleback. So that was quite an undertaking, retrieving this firewood and getting it back to the chalet.
There was a wonderful fellow in Calgary, and he was the chief surgeon for the Calgary General Hospital. His name was Smitty Gardner. And Smitty was from Nakusp, and Donnie was a climbing partner of Chic's. But Smitty used to come up in the early days, and he was a logger. You know, when he was going to medical school, he was logging to pay his way. And this was in the days when you could cut 1 or 2 trees, and he'd say, okay, Franny, we're going to go for that one. And Smitty would bring down that tree and bring it in for me. So we had great medical help too.
Right. Oh, there's a question in the back there.
So Fran, you first began at Twin Falls in 1962. And what has the season life been? Has it always been 6 weeks and you would run it on your vacation from your job?
Oh, listen, I have brought up, I don't have children. I've had no time to get married. I've always had 2 or 3 jobs going in all directions. But I brought up at least 150 kids at Twin Falls. And everybody, I've had, Jim Gray and John Masters call me up when they had, before they had Canadian Hunter, Kerr McGee and then Canadian Hunter, and they'd say, oh gosh, would you take our kids? Okay. And yeah, on and on and on and on. And so the Martin kids, their dad had the Puma agency for all of Canada in Winnipeg. And the 3 girls all worked there. It just kept going on. And can we set our kid? And it's just like, we know she or he is safe up there, and they'll enjoy it. They'll eat well. They'll meet nice people. Go for it. You know, yeah.
So how long was it open?
It's only open July and August, and right now, because of the recession, I have to close if there are no people staying there, because we now have propane fridges because of Health Canada, and to keep that propane flowing for 1 lemonade a day, you can't do it, and you can't keep a fire going for 1 cup of tea a day, you know. So it's a tough situation. But we go with the flow, and so far we're here.
Yeah. One more question there. Yeah, is that Peter?
You didn't mention Peter Christensen.
Peter Christensen.
Peter Christensen. All right. Yes. All right. Well, Peter. Peter came to me. Hella, his wife, cut my hair yesterday. She got out of her sick bed to cut my hair, so I would look presentable for you today. But Peter and I got to know each other years and years ago because his wife's family has been cutting my hair for over 50 years. And Jill's too. And so I was in having my hair cut, and Hella came up to me and she said, "Do you need help at Twin Falls?" And I said, "I always need help at Twin Falls." She said, "Well, I've got one for you. It's my husband. He's just sold his business and is driving me nuts." So now Peter was one of the top hospitality people coming out of Denmark. He came to Calgary to set up the Four Seasons Hotel. He then started La Chaumière with partners, and then La Denoise downtown in the Chevron building. So he was wonderful. But anyway, he came in and stayed 10 days. And he had 2 or 3 young people working with him. And when I came in, he said, I've got to go. And so I'm going, "Peter, thank you very much for volunteering. Oh, it was so nice of you to come and help set this thing up. Okay, bye." And off he went. 3 days later, he was back. He said, "Now I'm cleaned up. Now I'll go for another 10 days."
Oh.
And he's been coming back and forth ever since.
Wow.
He is the general manager of the Danish Canadian Club, and one of my very good friends. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Well, it's been a wonderful spell. Thank you for all being so patient and enjoying such a wonderful fireside chat with Fran. Thank you very much, Fran.
Well, no.